Good morning, Scoop Nation. You are listening to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, May 11th. I am your host, Brian McClincy, and joining me today will be nobody. It's just going to be me, myself, and I. And on today's episode, I'm going to walk you through my predictions for the conference champions going into the 2023 season, as well as how I see the college football playoff shaking out and what I find to be the most likely national championship game. Before we dive into everything, though, be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel and check out BuckeyeScoop.com for more great Ohio State content from myself and from all of the insiders over at BuckeyeScoop.com, as well as all of the members of our fantastic community on the Ask the Insiders board. Now, I think we all want to know, Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan. I think we all kind of feel like that this year is going to wind up being those two teams again. And I think that's probably pretty accurate. A little biased, of course. I mean, if you're listening to this channel, obviously you can see everything around me. You can see my shirt. I'm a little biased in saying that I think Ohio State's going to win the Big Ten this year and get back to the top of it. We get Penn State at home. Yes, we got to go to Ann Arbor. Have we beaten them the last 2 years? No. So put them in the comments if you agree, disagree. I don't really care. Ohio State's winning that game this year. I think year two under Jim Knowles, we'll see a pretty vastly improved defense. I mean, we saw flashes of it last year. Obviously, gave up a lot of big plays there towards the end and couldn't, get the game won when we needed it to be won. But I think those players are going to have a lot more practice in this scheme. I think they're going to be able to pick up a lot more of it. I think they're going to be more sound in their lanes and in their assignments. And I think that this defense is actually going to take a pretty big jump in year two under Jim Knowles. So I'm confident that they're going to answer those defensive questions from last year. Now, the bigger questions are going to be offensive line, new quarterback. Can they stack up to what we're accustomed to over the last years in the Ryan Day offense? And of course, is Brian Hartline going to be calling plays? What's his role as offensive coordinator going to look like? And how is that going to impact the offense? I don't think it's going to impact it negatively. So I still absolutely assume that Ohio State's offense is going to be elite as it has been. And, Michigan returns a lot. They have Penn State on the road, Michigan State on the road. I think they'll still be able to get those done. And I think ultimately going into Ann Arbor in the end of the year, it's going to be 11-0 versus 11-0. And I think Ryan Day is going to get it done this year. And yes, roast me all you want in the comments for my prediction of last year that Ohio State was going to win by double digits. I stand by it. They may not win by double digits this year, though. I think it's going to be close. But I still have Ohio State winning that game, getting to the Big Ten championship, and I think playing Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin under Luke Fickell, even in year one, is going to be pretty vastly improved. You got transfer quarterback in Tanner Mordecai. Like I said, you get Ohio State at home, which honestly, if there's one game on this schedule for the Buckeyes, that's going to be the one that probably scares me the most outside of Michigan. Just because we never play well at Camp Randall, I feel like, and that's always a tough environment to play. So they'll be ready. Luke Fickell obviously knows Ohio State very well, so they'll be ready to play. I just don't think quite yet under year one of Luke Fickell that they're going to be ready to actually win that game. I think Ohio State gets it in the end. So I have them finishing 10-2, have them finishing top of the West, however. So we'll probably get a rematch in the Big Ten championship. And it may not be 59-0, but I still think Ohio State gets that win as well. Iowa, they could pose a threat. I mean, I don't know. Cade McNamara, maybe he can make that offense work like a well-oiled machine, but I doubt it. And then the only other team is Penn State. I just think they're going to be, right at the door, not yet able to actually come through it, though. Obviously, going to Ohio State is going to be tough. Yes, you get Drew Aller another year, and you have a pretty talented running back in Nick Singleton and a running back room. They've got a lot of talent around that offense and defense. So they'll be competitive in the Big Ten. I just think Ohio State, Michigan are obviously at that next upper echelon of the conference, and I don't see anybody really being able to dethrone them just yet. So it's going to come down to how that game plays out in Ann Arbor, in my opinion. Moving into the SEC, Georgia and Alabama, it's kind of the same deal, right? Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia and Alabama are going to be in that just championship game, in my opinion. I don't see anybody, and especially when you look at the schedules too. I mean, Georgia basically doesn't play anybody until week 12 when they go to Tennessee. So Georgia should, by all intents and purposes, be undefeated going into the SEC championship game. And I think Alabama could also very well be undefeated. They're a young team, but they get Texas at home, they get Tennessee at home, they get LSU at home. Their only really like maybe difficult road games would be at Auburn and at Texas A&M, and both of those teams I think are on the lower half of the conference. So I don't see really much test coming from Jimbo or the Auburn Tigers, even though it's a rivalry game. I still think Alabama likely is undefeated going into the SEC championship game as well against Georgia. And I'm going to give a little bit of a nod to the two-time national championships or national champions in Georgia in that game, but I'll never count Nick Saban out. At the end of the day, as you'll see as we get into it a little bit here in just a minute, I have both of them still making the college football playoff, getting two SEC teams back in as ESPN is, wanting to do every single year, anyways. A couple, that could pose some it could shake things up a little bit. Obviously, LSU, Brian Kelly, kind of coming into his own, starting to build his team down there in at LSU, and bringing back Jaden Daniels is going to be big. Bringing back Harold Perkins, Mason Smith. I mean, they'll be decent on defense. They'll be pretty good, and I think offensively they'll be okay. You lose Booty, but I think they're again kind of similar to Wisconsin, kind of similar to Penn State. I think they're just going to be right there, but they don't yet have the pieces I think in place that I would say confidently that they're going to beat a team like Alabama at Alabama. If that game was in Baton Rouge, we might have a different conversation. But I think LSU will be right on the cusp there, and then Texas A&M, Tennessee. I think Texas A&M might have a relatively difficult decision on is Jimbo Fisher actually going to take us to the promised land. Um, we've seen pretty much this consistently with a lot of his teams, right? And I don't think we're going to get much difference there. Tennessee, Josh Heupel, I think he's got a great team around him. I don't think Joe Milton is necessarily the answer. Losing a lot of the firepower that you have from that offense last year, there's a lot of question marks around is are they going to be as efficient as they were last year to compete with teams like Alabama, like Georgia. And, yes, you get Alabama at home this year. So, or not Alabama, you get Georgia at home this year. So that could bode well, similar to how last year having Alabama come to Neyland was ultimately the difference maker. So could that be? Yes. I just don't think that this Tennessee is going to be exactly what we saw last year, and I think that's going to be the problem. Moving into the ACC, I think Clemson kind of gets back on top of things. I don't know that they finish undefeated. I think they'll find a loss somewhere. I think there are some tough teams at the top of the ACC. Florida State could be a dark horse, in my opinion. They do have a pretty tough schedule. They open with LSU. If that game goes well, they could make a really early statement on the college football world. But then they have to travel to Clemson, to Wake Forest, to Pitt, and to Florida all throughout the season. They do get Miami at home, but that's a pretty tough road schedule to have to go through. If they're able to go through and maybe have 1 to 2 losses of those what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then I think they could very well find themselves in the ACC championship game as well. I don't think they're going to be quite ready yet, to win that or get to like a college football playoff. But I do think that they surprise some people this year and that they actually get a few of those wins knocked down. North Carolina, Drake May coming back. Obviously, he's an elite talent at quarterback and maybe the quarterback one of next year's draft. Though I think it's Caleb Williams. But I don't think he has enough around him anymore, especially not with Josh Downs, no longer being there. So North Carolina, I think, is going to be, you know, towards the top of it, but I see them having a couple losses coming into the season. Miami, another one that's, could they surprise people? Yes. Is Mario Cristobal the answer? Can he actually get that turned around the way that I think we all thought he could? Maybe, but I don't really see it. You got to go to North Carolina, to Florida State, and you get Clemson at home. You also play Texas A&M early in the season, so kind of similar. If they can make a statement in that game, the way maybe Florida State can against LSU, maybe the conversation changes. But I just don't think, based on what we saw last year, I don't think that Miami is back yet. So despite all the pushing for it. Same thing with Big 12. Is Texas back? I actually think they're going to win it this year. So Texas, we saw them play Alabama really well last year. Assuming Quinn Ewers is the quarterback that starts over like an Archie Manning, which I think is going to be the case. They have a ton of quarterback talent there. Obviously, we saw that. Having Xavier Worthy there is going to be huge as well. They actually are third in returning production in the nation, so they have a lot of talent coming back from a team that lost all of their regular season losses by a combined total of 18 points. So some of those are going to go the other way this year, in my opinion. And I think Texas will be relatively back in a sense that they're going to win the Big 12, not relatively back from a national landscape perspective of getting to the college football playoff. Oklahoma, I think, will be a lot better as well. Similar, they went 0-5 in one possession games last year. And again, some of those are gonna flip and go, the Sooners' way. I think this year you've got another year of Venables' defense. I think that's going to be improved. So I think we'll see some pretty decent improvement from last year, but last year was pretty bad. So improvement is to be expected in this year. So I think they'll be there. I think they lose to Texas ultimately. I think they get maybe another couple losses on the schedule as well. But I think they'll be right there come the end of the season. Kansas State and TCU, I think, will also be really competitive. Kansas State more so than TCU, but I think TCU just lost too much, in from last year. I think they're going to have to, find a way to get similar production, and I don't think they have the talent to be able to do that in it's not a Georgia, it's not an Alabama, it's not an Ohio State, it's not they're not reloading at positions the way that a lot of these other teams that compete nationally do year in and year out. Will they be good? Yes. Will they be ranked? Probably, but I don't see them really competing that much for the Big 12, and as a result, that much for the national championship the way they did last year. Kansas State, I think they have not a dark horse chance, but they have an outside chance even to win the Big 12. So keep an eye on them. They've got Will Howard back. They've got a great running game. They should be competitive in a lot of games the way that they were last year and the way that they showed they can be. It's just consistency. Can they do that week in and week out? That's what we haven't seen. If they can put that together and they can be consistent over the course of the entire year, then I think they could definitely push Oklahoma and Texas for the Big Ten crown. And lastly, the Pac-12, it's kind of more competitive than I had expected as I was looking into this, right? So USC, I think, is going to win it ultimately. I think Caleb Williams coming back and kind of making his case for first overall draft pick, QB1 coming out of this year, I think is going to be a pretty impressive performance offensively for Lincoln Riley and the Trojans. I have them finishing out at 11-1. I'm going to give them a loss somewhere. I don't know exactly where it'll be, but I think that somebody will maybe pick them up on a down week. But ultimately, I think they win the Pac-12. I think they win the Pac-12 championship game, and then right behind them, you've got, like I said, a logjam. I mean, Oregon State, Oregon, Utah, Washington, UCLA. I mean, it could go really any one of those ways when it comes to who is kind of next in line, right? I think Oregon State bringing in DJU from Clemson is going to be huge. I think that was a piece that they really could have utilized last year to get over the hump, and I think he'll be a much more impressive than maybe we remember him being at Clemson. Oregon, Bo Nix being healthy ultimately was the crux of their season. So if he can stay healthy, I think their offense will be on par with what it was last year. I think they've got a very talented roster, both on offense and defense. They'll be competitive as well. They could very well win the Pac-12, but I just don't see them being ready to beat a team like USC just yet. And then Utah, I mean, they've won it 2 years in a row, so we can't really count them out. They've proven that they can overcome that adversity. Cam Rising tearing his ACL is less than ideal, obviously. I think that'll be a pretty uh, big piece of, can they actually get that three-peat? Can they come out and perform the way that they have the last couple of years? And they've lost a lot of talent as well, so especially defensively, and that's going to be a big impact to me. I just don't think that they have the talent to reload again, kind of similar to TCU. They can't reload year in and year out. It takes some time. You got to get guys that have been in the program for a few years, that know it well, and that are gritty, like a Cam Rising. And if they can find those guys on their roster, then they that's what they need, right? And they might have them. I mean, we'll see as we go, but like I said, it's going to be close between a lot of these teams. Washington with Penix Jr. back, they had a great passing offense last year, and I think that's going to be the same this year. But their November slate of games, I looked this up: USC, Utah, Oregon State, and Washington State. So their November is going to probably define their season. They'll likely be ranked going into it, and then I see them losing probably two of those to maybe USC and Oregon. They might get Utah or Oregon State. Sorry, they might get Utah. I think they'll beat Washington State. I'm not sure that they'll be as good as they kind of expected to be, but um, Washington's another kind of dark horse candidate in my opinion. And then UCLA, I think Dante Moore is going to be really good for Chip Kelly and the Bruins, and I think that eventually he will be able to make them competitive. I just don't think it's going to be this year. It'll probably be, by the time they move to the Big Ten, they'll have a lot more production coming out of Dante Moore, and I think he's going to produce really well at the college level as well. So going into the college football predictions, my four, and I was going to say in no particular order, but I actually think this is probably the likely order that it would be if it is these four teams: Georgia, Ohio State, USC, Bama. And then your first two out would probably be like a Michigan, as well as maybe like a Texas, right? I think that's, or Clemson. Whoever wins the ACC, I guess that could be your 5 and 6. But I think if it's Michigan and Clemson is looking at 5 and 6, like first one out, I think the Michigan loss to a playoff team would likely take precedence, right? So I think with that, you get Georgia Alabama rematch in the first semifinal. I think Georgia wins that game again, although we could see, like we saw a couple years ago, where Georgia wins the national championship, Alabama won the SEC championship, right? So it's always tough to predict those kind of like back to back matchups in that way. But I think Georgia still gets it done. Ohio State, USC, I think that's another matchup that people really want to see. At least I really want to see. Um, and I think Ohio State gets that done. I think the defense will be better for Ohio State than it will be for USC, and I think they'll be able to stifle Caleb Williams a little bit, enough to, you know, get the win at least. And then you get the national championship that everybody I think wants, which is Georgia and Ohio State, round two, for all the marbles this time, even though it was technically, you could say it was for all the marbles last time. You get Marvin Harrison again. You get the matchup that produced one of the best games I think that we've seen in the college football playoff era. And I mean, I wouldn't be on this channel if I didn't say Ohio State's going to win it. So you heard it here first. Ohio State, Georgia, national championship. I know, shocking predictions all the way around. I think the talent's going to be too much on a lot of these teams to be able to go with a dark horse candidate. Though I'll probably be wrong, and somebody's going to show up this year that will outperform these blue bloods in that sense. But there's going to be a lot of money if this is the four. So ESPN, you're watching, do it. That's all I got for today. Like I said, leave some comments down of your thoughts on my predictions, your predictions, who's going to win each of these conferences, who's going to find themselves in the college football playoffs. And until next time, go Buckeyes.